So last weekend at Barber Motorsports Park, I had the unfortunate experience of blowing a freeze plug on the back portion of the track pretty high on the top of fifth gear. And I didn't know exactly what happened at the time, but I know that I lost like half of the power, and I was trying to go through my head, try to figure out what happened. I was wondering if I had an SV325. I didn't know if it was electrical, and it was super weird. I ended up pulling off to the side of the track and looking at a whole bunch of white smoke coming out and whatnot. So got to take the crash truck of shame back to the pits and figured out what happened, and that it must have blown a freeze plug. And when I pulled the radiator off at the track, there was literally nothing inside of it. So the freeze plug blew on the front. So where they are is on either side under the valve cover. So there's one there and there's one there. They're on either side of the spark plug. What happened on this one was in the front, the left side blew out, and I just found it laying inside of there, and the right side was still in there fine. So this motor was the first time I was ever running it, and I know that it had previously had freeze damage, and some of the freeze plugs had been replaced. It was one of the stock ones, not one of the replaced ones, that blew, so I have a feeling that when it did get the freeze damage, that it loosened some of the other ones up. So I have a spare junk motor that I've been practicing on doing a replacement for this. So I'm going to get you set up and show you what I found. Suzuki doesn't appear to actually acknowledge the existence of these things. Whether or not they're actually freeze plugs is up to your own interpretation. My understanding is they're 22mm expansion plugs that are put in here after casting. They just have the fortunate ancillary benefit of, if you do leave water in it and it freezes, that they can save the block. So I'm gonna try to replace my freeze plugs so I can hopefully race at Pittsburgh soon. Now, before I go any further, I do want to state that I am 100% not an expert on this. All of the knowledge I do have about this is from reading decades-old forum posts about it. So what I'm going to do, because the bottom one will show better, hopefully it actually shows it all, is that I will remove the lower one and I'll put a new one in. So this is what this is what the top one looked like. I spun this one out and then I put a new one in like this. One thing I was worried about is whether or not they're magnetic. They are. The one that I'm going to put in is, this is a zinc freeze plug, and you can order them from Spears. I have a set of 4 coming from Spears, but then I was like, I don't know if that's going to get here in time. I found a 25 pack on Amazon for $17 and grabbed a bunch of them so I get to play around and practice. So why I wanted to make sure that they were magnetic is that I was worried about driving one in too far and what happens if it does. And if it does, you are able to pull it back out. So I've got a punch. What I'm going to do is spin this bottom one 90 degrees, and they're in there pretty damn good. But I'm going to knock it with this punch to spin it 90. That's started. Alright, so it's in there, it's spun. I should be able to pull it out with the pliers. It's going to take some force, and I'm going to knock the camera, I know it. The other one this much. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Alright, so freeze plugs out. I don't want to damage the outside of it, but this is what the stock one looks like in there. So the instructions I saw from Spears to put a new one in is to find a socket that will fit on the inside of it. So this is a 14, and then to slightly tap it in to get it started, then find one that goes just on the outside and push it in the rest of the way. In my practice, if I put a 15mm in, this is a 14, I didn't like how it was hitting on the sides, so I've just been using this. So I'm going to get it started. Oh, I'm missing one thing. Alright, so I'm going to get this started with the 1/2 with the little extension on the top of it. I'm going to be putting it in dry. I believe they're supposed to be put in dry. I've heard of other people using some type of sealer. I don't know that using Honda Bond type thing is going to be the right choice because it might pop out. I've heard of people using red Loctite. I don't think that's the right choice, given that that stuff starts to loosen up the hotter it gets, and this gets hot. And then what I was planning on using was this bearing compound, or the retaining compound 680, because this stuff works crazy good on stuff like bearings. But again, I read a thread about somebody doing exactly that and the thing popping back out. So The toughest part is getting these things started and then knowing how far to drive it in. I actually just did this before I drove it in too far, so I ended up pulling it back out with the magnet and the pliers. I'm going to try it again. So I'm going to drop it in, and then it's going to take some force to get it started. And I'm just going to keep checking it to make sure I'm getting it in flush. I'm going to have to take a couple big hits on it once I have it flush, and then slowly tap it to where I want it. And I'm just going to try to match what the stock height was. Okay. Whoops. No, not really. Okay, now I'm feeling it move into it. So, if you can see it at all, that's where I'm at. I'm starting to get to where it's flush, and then it looks like I want to go a couple millimeters past that. So I'm going to take a little force off these strikes and try to drive it down to where I want it and not go too far like I just previously did. I think 1 millimeter more and I'm where I want to be. Right there. Looks just about good to me with one last tap. Okay, that's where I want it. So I can stop spinning this light above with my hat. And I believe that's a freeze plug replacement as far as I know. So I'm gonna go try to do it on the bike now. So I just got the front freeze plug installed like I showed on the scrap engine before. I was a lot softer with it, so anybody who wants to complain that I looked like a gorilla firing around with a hammer, well, I kind of did, because I don't really care about that scrap block piece. So what I'm doing now, I hung the radiator back on temporarily, and I am pressure testing it. And we have been sitting at 1.6 bar for about 20 minutes now while I cleaned up, because my fear was putting it in dry was that there may be small imperfections on the sealing surface that would allow, you know, fluid to get through, and then all of a sudden you're just mixing oil and coolant again. So I figure if I pressurize it up to 1.6 and leave it for a half hour, I'm going to feel more confident than not having pressure tested it. The radiator cap that comes with these on stock is a 1.1 bar, sorry, right there. They're 1.1 bar, so I'm over pressurizing it, but I know that Spears sells a 1.6, and some people run that, and I do have one of those coming just in case, so I want to make sure that it's going to be fine at 1.6. The only thing left that I'm worried about is, you know, they are dissimilar metals, so if they expand and contract at different rates, who knows? So obviously I'm going to have to run it, but I'm going to feel better knowing that it pressure tested out. I elected not to replace the one remaining stock freeze plug there. And I may second guess myself on this one. You're like, you're going through all of this, why don't you just do it? If it blows, then I'll feel stupid for not having done it. But when you remove them, I found, I mean, you do have to hit them with that punch, spin them around, and then on their way out, I think you run the risk of leaving a surface imperfection on there, and I don't feel confident in using any of those sealers to fill up an imperfection. So I'm electing not to do it, and maybe that's going to bite me in the butt, but right now it's holding. And if that one was loose from before, I feel like at 1.6 bar it should start to push itself out if it is going to give. So there we go. Last thing to do is run a couple oil cycles through it to flush out all of the old coolant and whatnot that's still stuck inside of the engine, and fill it up with good oil at the end of that, and hopefully we're good. That's what I know about freeze plugs. I don't know if it's much, but if you're like me and you don't know anything about these things, hopefully this is useful. You watched this far. Thanks for watching.